Okay. Hi, today is September 28th, and I'm Tammy Sloop, Regional Editor for Shaw Media, and we're here with U.S. Representative Cheri Bustos, who's running for re-election in Illinois' 17th Congressional District. We're also joined by Sauk Valley Media Editor Erlene Hinton. Thanks for being with us today, Cheri.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me.
Sure. We're going to start out. If you can just tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're running for re-election.
Sure. So I am a native of Illinois. I've lived here my entire life other than going away to college. And I've been married for going on 34 years. I've lived in this region of the state of Illinois for decades. My husband is the sheriff of Rock Island County. We have raised our three sons. We now have three grandchildren as well. That's a little bit on my personal side. Professionally, I was a journalist for almost 2 decades of my life. That's what I started out doing. In fact, that's what brought me to the Quad Cities. And then I worked in healthcare for another decade, and now I've been in Congress for 8 years. So 3 different careers, but there's kind of a thread that goes through all of them. Mm-hmm. And so that's on the professional end of things. And then governmentally, I'm running for my 5th term. I absolutely am honored that people of this region have elected me 4 different times. I'm hoping that they'll have faith in me to elect me for this 5th term. I am the only Midwesterner in senior House leadership, which means that when you look at those sitting around the leadership table in Washington, D.C., almost everybody is coastal. So you've got LA, San Francisco, New York, Boston. So I bring that, hopefully that Midwestern voice to the leadership table. And as far as why I'm running again, it's probably, not a whole lot different than how I felt each time I won for re-election. There's always work to do. I believe that every day you get a little bit better at this job. Certainly every term you get a little bit better at this job. There's a big learning curve. But I'm grateful that now for 2 terms I have sat at that leadership table, bringing that voice. And while I have that higher level position, I run my congressional office as if I'm a mayor, meaning hyper local, making sure that we bring money back to places like the Thompson Prison and pay attention to what's going on there, places like the Rock Island Arsenal, places like for small businesses, especially when we are living through this worldwide pandemic, and doing what we can to help families, to help small business owners, to help our family farmers. And then I think just lastly, as far as maybe to round out who I am, I have served on the Agriculture Committee since I was first elected. I earned my way to now serve on what's considered the most powerful committee in all of Congress, which is the Appropriations Committee. And usually if you serve on one of what's called an exclusive committee, you're not allowed to serve on any other committees. But I sought permission from the speaker to ask if I could still stay on the Ag Committee. And so I'm still on that. A reflection of my family's long roots in agriculture, but also that we live in an agricultural driven economy. And I want to make sure that I have that voice that I can take from home out to Washington, D.C. So I think that's kind of a little bit about who I am professionally, personally, and why I hope to be reelected again.
For our viewers, can you talk a little bit about your role with the Appropriations Committee, what it does, your experience on that committee?
Sure. So this is a committee, like I said, most consider it the most powerful committee in all of Congress. And the reason is because all federal funding goes through the Appropriations Committee. And I happen to be on the subcommittees where somewhere around 80% of all federal funding goes through the subcommittees that I sit on, Labor, Health and Human Services, and Education, and Defense and Veterans Affairs. So anything that's built for veterans goes through the Veterans Subcommittee of Appropriations. Anything to do with defense, and you know this, but the vast majority of spending is either in the health end of things. So I'm on the Labor, Health and Human Services and Education Subcommittee, and then Defense. So these are very, very powerful committees. And because the committee, especially the subcommittees, are so small, that gives me a voice in some of these critical funding areas. And especially when one of the largest employers in all of our congressional district is the Rock Island Arsenal. And I've been able to bring back hundreds of millions of dollars to the Rock Island Arsenal and do things like develop what's called the Advanced Manufacturing Center, as Center of Excellence for Advanced Manufacturing, where, you know, when the government looks at military bases all over this country, what we always want to make sure is that we are relevant, we are making a difference, we are here for our men and women in uniform wherever they are in the world, and the arsenal is becoming more and more and more critical to our national defense structure and mission. And so I think that's probably the best way to describe it. And if you want to touch on the Ag Committee for just a second, so I've got the funding end of things, and then the policy end of things on agriculture. So I think these are committees that very much complement our congressional district.
Yeah, that ties into a question we had later down, was how as U.S. Rep have you advocated and will you advocate for the agricultural economy in the district, since so much of it is rural?
Well, it absolutely is. And, you know, as I said, I come from a long line of farmers. My grandfather was a hog farmer. My cousins are Angus farmers. My aunt and uncle and other cousins are dairy farmers. They all grow corn and beans. So this is my family's, this is what they do for a living. And, you know, these are hard times for our family farmers right now. And it's a combination of, with climate chaos that we're living through, when our entire western border of our state is the Mississippi River, when the Illinois River runs through the southern part of our congressional district, when we had this derecho come through and do damage to literally millions of acres of farmland and even the infrastructure of a farm. So we've got that we're dealing with, and I'd like to talk a little bit, if I can, in a moment about what I wrote called the Rural Green Partnership that helps address the climate and making sure that we in agriculture have a seat at the table. That's one component, but then the other component is we have a president who has not been kind to the family farmer. Ethanol and biofuels are critical industries for our family farmers, especially in an area like ours, where in Iowa and in Illinois, you've got the #1 and 2 highest producing corn and soybean states in the nation. And the president has made a decision to pass out these small refinery waivers like it's their candy on Halloween. And they've actually quadrupled the number of these small refinery waivers since the Obama administration. Now keep in mind, these waivers are designed to be given to small refineries. Thus, that is why they are called small refinery waivers. And it's to give them an opportunity to compete with some of the larger refineries because we do the ethanol blend. However, the Trump administration has made decisions to give out these small refinery waivers to these little teeny boutique oil companies. I say that facetiously, like ExxonMobil. And, you know, this has been devastating. Family farmers, it's all about having markets. So you've got that we've had to contend with. And then the other thing is under the Trump administration, we have been in trade disputes and trade fights and trade wars on and off for his entire term, to the point where under the Obama administration, I actually went to Cuba twice. Once with the president and President Obama, and a second time with on an agricultural trade mission. And we had the capability, if you just look at Cuba alone, we had the capability of having $2 billion a year in new trade. All that went away. And then same thing if you look at our fights that we've had with with China. And in our HEROES Act that we passed, that is sitting over on the Senate side, we had $16.5 billion in that HEROES package to help our family farmers navigate everything that we're going through right now.
Hey, Cheri, I have a question. What percentage in your district does acreage for corn harvest go towards ethanol? Do you know that number?
Yeah, it's about 40%. Now, and keep in mind too, we've got 9,600 family farms in our congressional district. And again, you know, I don't want to say they all grow corn and beans, but the vast majority do. You know, when I fly out and head out to Washington, D.C., or when I fly in, I can almost spot from the air as soon as we hit our part of the country, because it's, you know, it's farmland everywhere. But it's a critical market. And now we've been fortunate. We have 7 ethanol or biofuels plant in our congressional district, or just right on the perimeter. We've been fortunate that none of them have closed down. In other parts of the country, there have been ethanol plants that have shut down. They're idle right now. So we've got to get this in the right place. And you know, and what happens? I don't know if you saw this news just a couple weeks ago, but all of a sudden, the Trump administration makes an announcement that they're going to take money out of USDA and give it to big oil. Now, we put a stop to that, but I mean, you just think about it. It's like a tone deaf response to what people in our part of the country are living through right now.
You said you wanted to talk a little bit, I think I wrote this down right, the Rural Green Partnership. Yeah,
so it fits in pretty well with as we talk about agriculture. So if you remember when there was a climate proposal that was released, got a lot of attention. And when that came out, it was very clear to me that this was, did not pay attention to our part of the country. And nor did it really show respect toward those who are in agriculture. So I wrote out of my office something that we call the Rural Green Partnership. And what it is as we address the climate crisis that our world is going through, what we're saying is that we in Middle America, we in the Midwest, want a seat at the table as we debate the climate. Number 2, that we want to be looked at as we could be part of the solution. And we don't want folks from other part of the country to point their fingers at us as if all we are is part of the problem. So, so I wrote this plan called the Rural Green Partnership. I actually testified before the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis, and they adopted in their final report many of the components that are in our Rural Green Partnership, such as ethanol, and that being something that could play into low carbon, high octane fuel. Things like carbon capture, like conservation practices, like precision agriculture. So those are all components of our Rural Green Partnership, and we were very happy that many of those components were adopted in a final climate proposal that came out of the Select Committee.
So Cheri, how do you get the family farmer to get on board with that? I mean, it sounds really good in theory, but is there going to be an expense to it? So how do you really get them to embrace it?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, because we actually, before I finished this and submitted this and testified before the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis, I sat down with farmers. This is a plan, and I would love it for you to post it on your website so those who are watching this can also learn a little bit more about what's in there. And my communications director can send that off to you. But we sat down with our family farmers and got their input and got their endorsement. The Farm Bureau has endorsed this. The corn growers have endorsed this. The Soybean Association has endorsed this. And because we don't use, you can use kind of a carrot or a stick approach to so many of these different proposals. We use more of a carrot approach to it. That, you can't keep asking our family farmers to keep doing new things at their expense to their bottom line. We can't do it. So we have incentives. to do things like conservation practices. Because otherwise it's going to take too long to have people get on board with us. And so we actually have incentives on things like that.
And while we're talking a little bit on the family farm, let's segue a little bit into healthcare. You know, that's a huge issue for the family farmers. And what are your thoughts on healthcare, and what can you do to help not only family farmers, but other people who might be struggling with that aspect in their lives?
Both accessibility and affordability.
Yeah, I think it is the issue, not just right now as we go into this November 3rd election, but I think it was the last election cycle and before that and before that. So I told you when you asked me about myself that I worked in healthcare for a decade of my career. And in that decade, it was before the Affordable Care Act passed, during the time that it passed, and then after it began to be rolled out. And I can tell you from working in healthcare in that period that we were on an unsustainable path. There was nothing in America where the prices were going up more other than higher ed. You know, so we had this path that was continuing to go up like this, yet outcomes for patients weren't getting any better. You know, so you think if you pay more for something, you ought to get more for it, right? Well, that wasn't happening in healthcare. So the Affordable Care Act passes. I was not in Congress at the time. It passes, and it was rolled out. Now, the rollout was flawed. And I mean, I think anybody who was living through that could say that it just didn't go very well. But now that we're several years into it, we can see some of the good that has come out of it. Now, and what has happened during this time where we've insured 20 million additional Americans, and you know, our kids up to age 26 could stay on our insurance. I had 2 of my 3 sons took advantage of that because while they were employed full-time, their employer didn't offer health insurance. So we were able to help them through that. But, you know, we're just one family, an example that could be shared for, you know, millions of families all over the country. And then the other, one of the most important components and most popular components of it is that insurance companies can no longer discriminate against people and families with pre-existing conditions. And I don't know any family out there that doesn't have somebody who has had cancer or heart attack, or a child who's been born with some kind of ailment. And now that we have 7 million Americans who have been diagnosed with COVID, they all have pre-existing conditions now, every last one of them. And so at a time when we're living through this worldwide pandemic, what's going on is the Trump administration is going to court. And 1 week to the day after this election, the U.S. Supreme Court, which will have a different makeup, will be hearing a case to get rid of the Affordable Care Act. I do not agree with that. And you think about the chaos that would happen as a result of that. With, again, 20 million Americans have their health insurance because of the Affordable Care Act. So you think about the chaos. What can we do to make it better? I'm a lead sponsor of a bill that we did pass that's sitting over on the Senate side, that one of the 400 plus bills that's sitting on the Senate side with no action being taken, that would allow for the first time for us to negotiate the price of prescription drugs, to cap the amount of out-of-pocket expenses that families have on prescription drugs. Something that I think would make the Affordable Care Act better, would help bring costs down. And we need to make the insurance companies more competitive, because still, while we haven't leveled the price curve for insurance, but it has slowed, but it's still way too unaffordable for too many people. And I think with some of these changes, we can make it more affordable, and certainly on the prescription drug end of things. I can't even tell you how many times I hear the stories of people going to the Walgreens or to the family-owned pharmacy to get 30 days worth of a drug that they have to stretch out for 60 days. story after story, or leaving a doctor's office and not even being able to take that prescription down to the Walgreens to get it filled because they just can't afford it. So it is long overdue. That it is a promise that Donald Trump made when he ran, and it is not something that he has not signed our bill into law, nor has Mitch McConnell on the Senate side decided to take it up. But it's a good bill that could help a lot of families.
Somewhat related, how would you rate the federal government's response to COVID?
Oh, well, the federal government's response to COVID has been miserable because it has not been a coordinated response. You know, we're dealing with a pandemic that has no respect for any boundaries. And yet the Trump administration has told every one of our 50 states and our territories that you're on your own, you figure it out. You compete against this state for personal protective equipment. You compete against this other state for ventilators when you really needed those ventilators. We're not going to do anything to invoke the Defense Production Act to help bring down the cost and to bring up the production of the personal protection equipment, which, by the way, we are still running short of in some key areas. There has been no coordination for if and when we get a vaccine, for how that is going to be distributed, who's going to be prioritized. But we need a whole of government approach to this rather than a federal government under the President Trump's leadership pulling us out of the World Health Organization, dismantling the pandemic response division within Health and Human Services. I mean, it's just, we as a result of this mismanaged approach have 204,000 Americans who have lost their lives and 7 million Americans who have been diagnosed with this potentially deadly virus. So I would rate it an F. It's been absolutely miserable.
Do you see this as an election that will hinge on President Trump? I mean, and how people react to him?
Well, you know, we know that there are roughly 40% of Americans who will support Donald Trump no matter what. No matter what. And so, you know, I don't, it is not my goal in this election cycle. It wasn't the last election cycle to go around bad-mouthing him as a man or some of the ridiculous things he has said. But it is certainly my responsibility as a member of Congress to talk about the policies that have been failures. You know, we passed this HEROES Act more than 4 months ago that would help every one of our 150 towns in our congressional district, that would help the state of Illinois, that would help our first responders, that would give the money to our hospitals and our clinics to make sure that they can stay open and have the personal protective equipment that they need. Same thing with our nursing homes. We passed that. So, you know, when you asked me to rate the federal government's response, had the Senate side taken up this HEROES Act and passed that, and had President Trump signed that into law, we would be in a much better place than we are today. We did our job on the House side. But you know, I think we're a divided government right now. We're a divided country right now. We need healing. We need to depoliticize so much. I mean, who ever thought in a million years that wearing a mask, something that the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says is the best practice, who in a million years would have thought that that would become politicized? But it is. The fact that we, you know, look at some of the meetings that are out there. You can tell it's a meeting where there's a Republican audience and a Democratic audience. It shouldn't be that way. We should be practicing social distancing. We should wear a mask if we are nearby somebody. We should use our hand sanitizer. We should be very careful when we are inside, and we should be outside as much as possible when we're in meetings. Our meetings should be small groups. That's all science. And, you know, science has become politicized. I think there's a lot of healing that needs to happen. And you know, I'm for Joe Biden for a lot of reasons, but you know, even if you look at Joe Biden from just who he is as a human being, and the pain and the heartache that he has been through, and how he can relate to others who have been through terrible pain and heartache, like so many families out there. And he's the guy, if you look at his history, remember when he was criticized for saying that he had many Republican friends who he worked with when he was in the Senate? He was criticized for that. I happen to think that's a pretty good thing. I happen to think it's a pretty good thing to try to find people you can work with, because we are going to need that desperately in the coming term.
How important is the debate tomorrow night?
I think the American public wants to see how this is going to go. Is Donald Trump going to play fair? Is Joe Biden going to be able to articulate what he would do as president of the United States? Is he going to be able to deflect and defend and punch back if he needs to do that? Because, you know, look, I went to one of the presidential debates when Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton debated, and you know, he's not exactly a fair fighter, and facts don't always roll off his tongue, and you know, so you got to be ready for that. When you go into the arena, you got to know you know, what the other side is likely to do in his performance. But I have deep confidence in Joe Biden. I think he's going to do great. I think he is a very, very good human being who understands federal government and how it works and how to make things happen.
What are your thoughts on the protests and the social unrest happening across the country? And what role does or should the federal government play in addressing these issues?
Well, I think it's not just a federal government response that needs to happen, but I think it gets all the way down to the most local levels. You know, these are, you know, police relationships with the community happen at a very local level. I was a supporter of the Justice and Policing Act, which has many good components, such as, you know, looking at training for police officers, looking at de-escalation, looking at if there's a bad police officer, that police officer can't go from one town to the next. But I also want to acknowledge I'm married to the sheriff of Rock Island County. And, you know, we met when he was a rookie police officer and I was a rookie reporter covering the police beat. So, you know, I've seen him in every iteration of his career, going from, you know, patrol to being an undercover drug agent to running the detective bureau to being the undersheriff to now being the sheriff. And I can tell you this, most police officers are very, very good people. They care deeply about their community. They care deeply about communities of color, and they want to do right. And I think that's worth acknowledging. On the other side, there are, in communities of color, they have been way too often treated unfairly and unjustly. And so I think the best thing that we can do, and I know this is happening behind the scenes, not with the press at all these meetings, not with the TV camera at all the meetings, but there's a lot of work that's going on with communities of color and law enforcement coming together. However, I think it's also worth noting that this is much more than just a law enforcement issue. It is making sure that no matter where you come from, that your education, if you come from a wealthy area, or if you come from an area that is not wealthy, that education for our kids has to be good. It has to be. It's one of the greatest lifters of poverty is good education. Same thing with access to healthcare, access to good food, to healthy food. I've got a bill that I wrote called the Social Determinants Accelerator Act. It's not a very sexy name, but what it does is we were able to get $10 million set aside for pilot programs to study why there are these disparities in different communities, and why, and in studying, if you don't have access to fresh fruit and vegetables, well, that has an impact on your family. If you have to drive many miles to get to a doctor, that affordable health care, that has an impact on your family. If your schools, if you're the age at which children become proficient at reading, it doesn't start happening by third grade, that has an impact on your community and your family. So we think that this is a way that we can look at making sure our kids can all be raised in safe and healthy homes, no matter where you live, but figuring out the root causes for some of these problems.
What are your thoughts on gun control, including assault weapons?
Well, I am another bill that I'm a sponsor of. By the way, all of these bills that I'm talking to you about, they've passed the House and they're over on the Senate, which is another political thing if we want to get into it, because this can't keep happening like this. But I am one of the sponsors of a bill that would look at criminal background checks. At minimum, that is what we need to do. This is, when we talk about guns, it can become such a divisive issue. And I don't think it needs to be that. The vast majority of Americans believe in that if you are deranged in some way, if you are a criminal, you should not have access to a weapon. You should not be able to buy a weapon. And so this is the first step in common sense reform is we have to start with criminal background checks. And I think it's something that should be bipartisan. It hasn't been, but it should be. And I think that, this is where the American public can weigh in. We know, if you want to look at things like polling, something like 96% of Americans believe in this. And I do believe that could be a first step to start addressing some of the gun violence that we've seen, not just in Illinois or the nation, but even in the congressional district that I serve.
What about Rockford? I mean, Rockford has had a lot of gun violence. What are you doing there specifically? Is this part of the bill, or what?
Well, the bill, because it's a federal bill, would impact every community in the nation. But specific to Rockford, I've worked very, very closely with Mayor McNamara in the Family Peace Center that has recently opened. I was there for when we announced it. We have worked on getting federal funding for that. I want to do a shout out for Mayor McNamara. I think he's been remarkable in making sure that he is in regular communication with us. He meets with the community. I think I'm on speed dial with him. I mean, there's almost a week that doesn't go by when he's not calling in asking if there's some way we can get help. But we've been able to secure federal grants to help with that project. But it is he's done the hard work that I love seeing a mayor do, which he's figured out that so much of the violence out of Rockford, it stems out of domestic violence. And so he is, as the mayor, has taken a leadership role saying, let's address this domestic violence, because we know so much of it has led to gun violence, has led to other violence in the community. So we've worked hand in glove with him on that project.
Okay. We've passed the half-hour mark, so I want to get a couple more questions in. Sure. Specifically about jobs. What is your plan to bring and retain jobs in the area, and can you point to any successes?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, right now, living through this COVID, our unemployment rate throughout the nation. We were seeing week after week of $1 million plus, a million Americans plus, week after week after week filing for unemployment. So first of all, it is to get through this pandemic in a way that we can start rebuilding our country in a way that looks at jobs that may be lost forever as a result of this pandemic. and making sure that training is part of that. I've got a bill that helps address, what do the jobs of the future look like? How do community colleges play into that? How do our building trades play into that? Second of all, when we do get on the other side of this pandemic, we're not going to be able to crawl. It's not going to work. We're going to have to run at a sprint level. And so I believe one of the first things that President Biden should do, and I would be supportive of this. I've already sponsored this bill. It's already passed, called the Moving Forward Act, which looks at rebuilding our nation in a way that we look at schools. So many of our schools in our region are, they need to be rebuilt. They need to be added onto. They need to be, we need brand new schools. Same thing with hospitals. Same thing with broadband. We have 19 million Americans that don't have access to high-speed internet. Same thing with our roads and bridges. And in an area like ours, again, with an ag-driven economy, with the locks and dams, we are one of the heaviest locks and dams congressional districts in the country because of the Mississippi River and the Illinois rivers. An investment in that impacts our ag economy, it impacts jobs. So the bill that I am a co-sponsor of, the Move Forward Act, would create 9 million new jobs as a result of rebuilding our country. And specific to our own region, I've been able to secure tens of millions of dollars to help with the reopening of the Thompson Prison. I know in Mount Carroll, partnering with Rock Island Growth to get housing developed there, we've been able to help with federal grants on that. It is something that we've heard from the warden and the leadership at the prison, that we need to make sure childcare is addressed and housing is addressed. And we've got money in our HEROES Act to address both of those, but we've been able to secure federal grants for our region along both of those lines as well.
Hey, I know that the Byron nuclear power plant is not in your district proper, but it is a big regional employer. Do you have any comment on their announcement earlier this year to close that plant? I know you went through it with Clinton and the Quad Cities plant, 4 years ago?
Yeah, we worked very closely with the nuclear generating industry to make sure that we could keep the Quad City nuclear generating station open. I mean, it's absolutely critical. By the way, even if you just look at it from a taxpayer perspective, that nuclear plant in Cordova is the biggest property taxpayer in all of Rock Island County. Right. You think about, we got John Deere, we have major employers, but it is the single largest property taxpayer in Rock Island County, and they are some of the best jobs. They are great paying jobs. Every last one of them they're jobs where you can support your family. So we've worked very hard to keep the plant in Cordova open. I'm saddened by the announcement about Byron. And by the way, as we look at clean energy, I mean, there's obviously risk with nuclear power, but it is clean energy. And as long as I'm in this job, I'm going to do my best to make sure that we can keep the Cordova plant open, and that we can make it a vibrant part of our community. We're working against headwinds on this. When you look at the climate and you look at our energy needs, it's going to have to be an all of the above strategy. So wind and solar and nuclear cannot just go away. We do not, if we just look at wind and solar, or even the coal-fired plants that are slowly evolving into other energy sources, you can't just rely on wind and solar alone. It's just not going to work. We have to evolve over the years, and nuclear power, I think, is part of the equation.
I want to give you the opportunity too, because we talked with your opponent earlier today, and she made some comments that you're essentially a Nancy Pelosi puppet and you're not responsive to constituents. I want to give you the opportunity to respond to that.
Yeah, well, I'm as I said in about who I am, I've lived in Illinois my whole life. other than when I went away to college. I've lived in this congressional district for decades, for 35 years, 35 plus years. I've raised my family here. This is what I know. And you know, I run my congressional office like I am mayor, in the sense that I focus on what's needed locally. And you know, there's nobody who is my boss other than the 711,000 people in this congressional district. And I think that it's clear I focused on results to the tune of, you know, bringing back hundreds of millions of dollars to our congressional district. In every one of the 14 counties, we've been able to bring back millions of dollars and help families. And you know, the fact that I have a seat at the leadership table, that's a good thing. The fact that I am the only Midwesterner in senior House leadership sitting at that table, that's a good thing. I can bring voices of our family farmer to Washington, D.C., or from our families where, you know, a family of four, an average family of four in our congressional district makes less than $50,000. I can take that voice of how many families are hurting during this pandemic and what we need to do to help. And I think I'm going to bet that voters are going to prefer that to somebody who is literally unpacking her boxes while she made a decision to run for Congress in an area that she's lived in for maybe a year now. So I think that elections are about choices. You know, it's in this case it is voting for me, or voting for somebody who has roots in Texas and certainly nowhere close to the Midwest, who's making a decision to come in here and, as I said, while she's unpacking her boxes, decide she's going to run for Congress. I think it's a clear and distinct choice that voters will have.
Well, you touched on our last question, which is essentially why should voters vote for you? Do you have any last thoughts you want to leave with viewers?
Yeah, I think it's, you know, I get people in our region. I've done 100 what we call Cheri on shifts, which is, you know, where I go out, whether it's processing carp out of the Mississippi River at Schaefer Fisheries, or whether it's going to the poultry farm in Pearl City, or whether it's working with one of our rural electric co-ops, changing a bulb on a street light. I've done 100 of these. I've been to pretty much every little teeny local library where I take books from the Library of Congress and donate them. Up until COVID, I went to supermarkets almost every Saturday, where I just walked the grocery store aisles and just asked people what was on their minds. So I would know that when I would fly out to Washington. But I'm a firm believer that God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, and we should use those proportionately. And that's how I've approached this job, by listening to people, by taking what I learn and what I know, because I live here and have lived here for 35 plus years, and taking that out to Washington, writing legislation, passing legislation, bringing back funds and help for our region when we need it. And I guess that would be my pledge. I'm deeply honored to serve in this role as a member of Congress for the last 8 years, and I hope that people will have faith in me that I'll do my best every day. People might not always agree with me. I understand that, but I can tell you I always do my best and I always work my hardest.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to talk with us today and answer our questions.